What's up, Duke fans, and welcome to another episode of Duke Blue Central. Happy to be back after a quick break. Been gone on some trips recently, so didn't have time or the place to record some new episodes over the past few games. But happy to be back with you. Apologies for the break, as always. Also, apologies for the slightly less stellar audio quality in this episode. Actually, don't have access right now to the microphone I usually use to record these eps. But nevertheless, I thought it was important enough to hop on here with slightly less good audio. But don't worry, the old setup will be returning very, very soon, so look forward to that. But we're going to go over really the last two Duke games, the win versus Clemson and then the win at Virginia Tech. Very briefly, I'll talk about kind of the two games that I missed as I was away. First one, after Georgia Tech being a really, really tough loss to the Pitt Panthers at home. Very tough loss to Jeff Capel's squad. But I'm going to be honest here, folks. I kind of just want to gloss over this loss because Duke was missing two starters in this game. We find out right before the game that both Jeremy Roach and Mark Mitchell are not going to be available, and Pitt was just perfectly executed how to beat us without those two starters that I think put together average about maybe close to 30 a game, just them two together at this point in the season. So obviously that's a massive deal to be missing those two guys. Not trying to make too many excuses. This was a game Duke still could have very, very surely won. But just to be frank with you, I'm not as concerned about dropping a game, even at home, to a team when you're missing two starters. Everything in this season for Duke is in preparation for March. And if you told me in March, we lost because two of our starters got injured, we lose in the second, third round because two of our starters are injured, I'm going to be like, of course we lose because people are injured. You can't help injuries. So I was actually, as much as it sucks to lose for seeding, I think that's the biggest takeaway from that game is just that Duke's seeding capability is not going to be quite as good with a loss like that at home. But we know that the committee can also look at things like who was out in the games that you lost. I hope they do that for Duke, especially considering 2 games before we had crushed them by 20 at their place. That is a game Duke does not lose if we have Jeremy Roach and Mark Mitchell. I'll tell you that right now. But we're going to move on from that. Honestly, look, Henson exploded for Pitt. I think made 6 or 7 threes. Pitt shot, I think, over 50% from 3 for the game, which they never really do. A combination of all bad things happening that resulted in a Duke January loss that we shouldn't have had, but we have these kind of losses every year, and especially with this one not even being at near full strength, it's just not something I'm overly concerned about. Right after that, went to Louisville and won. I honestly don't have much to say about that game. It was closer than it needed to be, but I think, Jeremy Roach played, obviously wasn't healthy again. The biggest thing was to just get out of a road atmosphere with a win, and Duke was able to do that. But I'm going to move on to really the more important games, and I kind of looking at the schedule. This 3-game stretch, I would argue, is the hardest stretch for Duke, certainly in conference play. Maybe not when you factor in the non-conference of, starting off with Arizona, then going straight to Michigan State. But this 3-game stretch of versus Clemson, at Virginia Tech, at North Carolina, is what I would call the toughest schedule, toughest 3-game stretch for Duke on the year. And we've started off with 2 wins. One win was by 1, really close finish, and we can start breaking down my thoughts of the Duke versus Clemson Duke victory at Cameron. This was obviously a really big win for Duke, and it was Clemson is a good team. I mean, look, I know they've dropped some games here and there, but they had a good non-conference performance against some teams that I think everybody thought looked better than they look now. I know Alabama is certainly not looking great. Had they picked up a win against Memphis, that would have really bolstered their non-conference schedule. But I do think Clemson is a tournament team. I think they're a second round tournament team. So anytime you're facing off against a conference opponent like that, it's going to be big, especially against a team that beat us last year, who matches up well against Duke, especially considering when you look at Flip's stat line for the game, which what we're talking about, a game in which Filipowski did not play well at all, and Duke is still able to win. Look, I mean, this game has been mired in quote-unquote controversy. I don't think it's very controversial at all. In case you missed it, it was a close game. I believe Duke was up 1. P.J. Hall gets fouled, I believe, on the other end, makes 2 free throws to put Clemson up 1. Duke dribbles the ball down the court. Tyrese Proctor drives in, takes a mid-range jump shot, also gets fouled, makes 2 free throws to put Duke up, ice in his veins with 1 second left. Clemson inbounds the ball. Nothing happens. Aren't able to get a shot off, obviously. Full court heave, 1 second. Pretty low chance. Duke walks out with the victory. Boy, were some of the Clemson players and coaches really fired up about this loss. But, I mean, look, bottom line is this. I do think those fouls at the end of the game were fouls. Clemson has no reason to complain about losing this game. They turned the ball over like 3 possessions in a row at the end of the game. They lost this game. They should have really lost this game for more than that. One of those turnovers led to 2 wide-open threes from Jared McCain and Tyrese Proctor, who on wide-open shots, I can't tell you what the number is, but it feels like on wide-open threes, Jared McCain is shooting more than 50%, perhaps even 60%, and Proctor has to be shooting around 50% as well. And we got 2 of those shots on the same possessions. Those would have essentially... Well, they wouldn't have won the game for Duke, but it would have put Duke up a certain amount. I think it would have put us up by 2, which, the way the game was going and the way Clemson's next few offensive possessions played out probably would have won the game for Duke. Duke misses those shots, but Clemson still ends up coughing the ball up, leading to some Duke points, and then at the end, the fouls took place. And to be honest, after last year's foul situation with Duke, I don't think anyone can complain about fouls not being called. Duke lost a share of an ACC championship, regular season championship last year because of a horrible call at Virginia, in which the ACC actually came out, apologized for the call, said that it should have happened, and said that Duke should have been able to go to the line to win the game. If you can't remember that game, Duke against Virginia last year, Kyle Filipowski got fouled right as time expired, as the buzzer rang, and for some reason the refs waved it off, which is not just straight up against the rules. If you're fouled even after time expires, you're supposed to get those shots no matter what, and they just got it wrong. I mean, it's incredible that they were just able to get that so wrong with all the resources we have today. Duke went to overtime against Virginia and lost, but the ACC came out and apologized for that, said that it shouldn't have happened, and this call against Clemson is nowhere near as controversial as that. So I don't want to hear it really. And I do think it was very emotional. Clemson was very emotional after the loss, both their coach and their players. Joe Girard tried to assault a referee. I mean, just crazy scenes at the end of the game at Cameron. And then Brad Brunell got up at the post-game conference and said the game was stolen from him, and said Duke is a hard place to play because we get all the calls. I mean, it sounded like an anti-Duke fan was at the press conference podium and not a head coach of a Division I ACC basketball program. Perhaps Brad should learn to speak at the podium a little better. No disrespect to the man, but blaming refs like that after a loss is just a loser's mentality, and that's perhaps a reason why Clemson basketball hasn't been as successful in the past few years, or really, I mean, ever too successful. But that coaching style leads to nothing but more disappointment and more heartbreak. Players see that, and players see that from their head coach, and it's easy for them to accept a losing mentality of blaming the referees for all your problems. Obviously, Duke is not innocent of this. There are times Kyle Filipowski has been a loser mentality when talking about calls and things like that, even though I think he does get fouled a lot and it doesn't get called because of his size. He's got to learn to accept that and overcome that. So I'm not being a hypocrite here. I'll call out Duke if they do it too, but that's just something. Like, can you imagine Coach K at the end of the game coming up and said this game was stolen from us? Like, imagine he says that. Like, that's just something an elite level head coach would not say, and that's something I think. If I was a Clemson fan, or if I was a athletic position at Clemson, I would be upset by Brad's comments at the podium. And maybe that's me talking through Duke blue collar glasses, but this is a Duke podcast. This is what you're here for. But it was a big game, nevertheless, by Duke. If you told me the stats of this game and how some players performed, I would have been really worried about the outcome for Duke, especially considering Kyle Filipowski's performance. His box score was not great, only finished with 9 points, 4 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 steal, finished with 4 blocks, 3 turnovers, and he also fouled out of the game. And that's something we're going to talk about throughout this episode, is Filipowski's continued inability to stay out of foul trouble. And what's interesting is when we get to the Virginia Tech game, it's not even necessarily just been early. A lot of the times when he's gotten foul trouble throughout this season, it's been he picks up 2 early in the first half and then kind of locks in for the second half. Against Virginia Tech, the next game we're going to talk about, it was the opposite. Had a pretty clean first half, and then the second half came out and got, I think, 3 quick fouls. But Flip just has to stay on the court. I mean, against some of these conference opponents, we can win without him, But when we start talking about Sweet 16, Elite Eights, Final Fours, if that's Duke's real goal for the season, which I think it is, and I think that's everyone's anticipation, is that they were going for a national title. We need him in those games. We need him playing 35 minutes in those games. And you can't play 35 minutes if you pick up 2 fouls immediately. And if you don't think the good teams in the country are going to look at games like this and say, oh, beating Duke is easy, we just have to foul Flip and then deal with everybody else, or get Flip in foul trouble, then play the rest of the guys, makes Duke a significantly more beatable team. Clemson wasn't able to capitalize on that because of a few reasons, some poor 3-point shooting. Now Duke defends the 3 pretty dang well, but yeah, shot 30% from 3. Duke was shooting 42% on the night. They also shot 23 threes and only made 7. Duke only shot 21, but was able to make 9 of them. That's a big swing. But Clemson wasn't able to capitalize on that. But other teams will, and Clemson may have on another night. That last play with Proctor, if he doesn't get fouled and misses the shot, we're talking about a loss here. Which is a very, very different result. Luckily, Duke was able to kind of escape with a win, and I think they deserved to win. And they played well enough to win. And in the final seconds, when we needed to make clutch plays, the Clemson players did not make clutch plays, and Duke did. And I'm not even just talking about the calls. Turning the ball over that many times late in the game ruins your chances of winning sometimes, when on the other side guys are hitting shots and hitting free throws, and that's what we did. We were able to take advantage of that. But against other higher quality teams, as we go deep into the tournament, hopefully as we are going deep into the tournament, teams are going to capitalize on Flip getting into foul trouble. It's something we've said in the past few episodes, but it's just something he needs to do. And I understand it's tough because we're playing him at the 5. He's our starting center here. So he's got to D up people and, try to block layups, and that oftentimes can lead to fouls. But something in his mentality has got to change, or maybe it's just a coaching thing of, maybe he's sticking out his elbow too much when he drives for offensive fouls. Maybe he's doing something on the defensive end, like not going straight up or swiping his hands down too early, that the coaches can look at. But he's just got to play smarter. He has to know how important he is to this team and how good he is, and how limiting it is with him off the floor for Duke in multiple ways. Defensively, rebounding, even though Ryan Young had a great game at Virginia Tech, which we'll talk about. He's just too important to this team to be on the court, to be on the bench. But without Flip, it was Proctor and McCain led the way, and I just wrote both of these guys are really hitting their stride at the right point at this time in the season, where every game seems to matter a bit more. Particular Tyrese Proctor has really just stepped it up. I think he's fully back from his injury. It feels like he was playing injured even while he was back. He's back now. Against Clemson, he made 4 for 6 3-pointers, a couple of them really nice. One of them was a crazy step back. Finished with 18 points, 5 rebounds, 2 assists, 2 steals, and only 3 turnovers, which you'd like to see that number not be as high, but you'll take it when a guy's producing like that. And even over the past several games, you can see Proctor's game stepping up. It's eerily similar to last year when Proctor just turned it on at the end of the year. It was even a little later last year, I think, but post-January, but we're starting to see Proctor now really hit that stride and take his game to the next level, which is something Duke is going to need if we want to make a national title run. So it's been great to see that. But he played awesome against Clemson, and obviously the thing we need to talk about with him is just the clutchness of being able to knock down 2 free throws when you're down is big. When you're tied and you're shooting free throws for the win, even if it's a 1-and-1, the pressure is not nearly there. Like if the score is 71-71 and he gets fouled and we're in the single bonus, that's a high pressure free throw, yeah, but it's not as high pressure as you're going to the line for 2 and we're down 1. That's just way more stakes, way higher stakes in that situation, and he was able to hit 2 to ice it away for Duke. A great game from Tyrese Proctor. Jared McCain also had an awesome game, finished with 21 points. We don't win this game without him. Still, it was on 3 for 7 shooting threes. He in 8 for 12 field goal. He just does so many other things other than shoot threes. He finished with 5 rebounds, 3 steals in this game, 2 assists, and no turnovers. What a monster game from him. What jumps out for him is his three-point shooting. Obviously, he's a 40% three-point shooter. He's really even higher than that, but his percentage kind of tanked. I think he went 1 for 6 against Virginia Tech, and that tanked it a little bit. But he's really even a better shooter than 40% from 3. He just takes so many. Obviously, he's going to miss a few more than guys who aren't shooting as much. But even when he is not finding his shot, finding his threes, he still finds so many other ways to contribute. It's incredible watching him play. The ways he just runs around, his off-ball movement's just so incredible. His defense is better than I thought. Obviously, look, I mean, you get him matched up on the inside against a big man, against a big wing. He's not going to fare that well. But against opposing guards, I have no problem with Jared McCain being out there. He's strong for how young he is, so he can really D up on smaller guards, which is primarily who he's guarding. But Jared McCain just makes so many winning games for Duke. And this was a game he played 32 minutes in. Duke is beginning to see that, the legendary beginning of the new year lineup minutes shrinkage, where we're going to start seeing guys play more and more minutes. And against Clemson in particular, we saw it because Flip was only able to play 24 minutes because of foul trouble. But Mark Mitchell played 37 minutes, Tyrese Proctor 38, Foster played 20 minutes, and then Jared McCain played 32 minutes. Jared McCain played more minutes in this game than Jeremy Roach did coming off the bench. Now Jeremy was obviously not healthy in this game. I mean, he was healthy enough to go out there, and it was a big enough game and a close enough game that we needed him out there. But he didn't have a great performance. He finished 1 for 8, 3 for 4 from the line. 2 rebounds, 1 assist, 1 foul, only 5 points for him. I think this game was one where he was obviously still testing out that ankle. Didn't have the speed he normally has. Roach is a quick acceleration type guy that can get to the basket in just a couple steps if you give him any room to breathe. And that part of his game just was not there to the full extent against Clemson. And even if you're just a second slower than you usually are. It's a big deal when we're talking about how close some of these these races to the basket can be, and it was a game where he wasn't as healthy. But still, we're seeing kind of the roster shrink down before our very eyes. And I'll talk about it again against Virginia Tech. Similar thing. We're playing 8 guys, and that's about it. And we played eight guys against Clemson, 8 guys against Virginia Tech. I believe we're seeing what this team is going to look like come March. There are a lot of if, ands, buts. Like Jalen Blakes has been a guy that's been getting left out of the rotation a lot. I think there are situations where he'll come in, but with how many guards we have, and we're seeing the real minutes distribution of this team more than we ever have before, and that's something that was on full display against Clemson, especially with all the foul trouble Flip was in. Only other negative talk about in the Clemson game was Duke's recent struggles at the free throw line. I'm hoping this is just kind of a fluky thing. Duke is a really good free throw shooting team. Against Clemson, we only shot 63%, 21 for 33, compared to Clemson's 81%, 18 for 22. Obviously, that's a big factor in the game. They took considerably less free throws than us, in part because they were taking most of their shots from the outside for whatever reason, even with Flip out, didn't decide to go inside. But that's a big deal, not being able to hit free throws. And then we followed it up with another, just to spoil, followed it up with another 60% free throw shooting percentage against Virginia Tech. Not as big of a deal because we only shot 10 free throws. So, and a lot of those were by big men. But that's something just to keep your eye on. I'm hoping that's just a couple game slide for them, just not being able to hit free throws. But it really affected the Clemson game. I mean, we left a lot of points. We left 12 points on the line. If we even hit just a couple of those, this game isn't as close in the end as it ended up being. But that's kind of all my thoughts against Clemson. Look, Clemson, once again, good team, tournament team. They should make the tournament this year as long as they don't just collapse at the end of the year. But this is a good looking win for Duke, and it's more so that it wouldn't be a great looking loss for Duke. That's important. So good win. Like I always say, better to come away with an ugly win than a pretty loss. And Clemson had a pretty loss, and this one, Duke had an ugly win. I like the side of the aisle that I'm on. Moving on to Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech, look, I mean, at the beginning of the year, if I would have bet money on one game where Duke really shouldn't lose, and we do lose, I would have absolutely said it was this one, because especially if you told me Duke beats Clemson in the way that they do. This game has just trap game written all over it. It's a game right against Clemson, who's a top tier, I think they're third place in the, or maybe not, but against a top tier ACC opponent, in my opinion, in Clemson. And then it's right before what everybody knows is coming up, the Carolina game this Saturday. Now, that's a few days away, but you're always going to look forward to that game as a Duke or a Carolina fan. And when that's on the horizon, a lot of other things fade away. And you throw in the factor that Duke has lost 5 of its last 6 games at Virginia Tech. Virginia Tech is a really hard place to play. I've been there in person 2 times now, and it is insanely loud. They do the Enter Sandman, or at least they did when I was there. They do the Enter Sandman for basketball as well, and there were times where they were just singing that at the beginning of the game where I was just thinking, how does anybody even play a basketball game in here? It was so loud. I think it rivals Cameron as maybe the one of the toughest places to play in the ACC and also just the country. Now, it helps if Virginia Tech had a better team than they did. When I went and saw them, those were the teams with, I can't remember the guys' names, but those were the teams Virginia Tech was going to the tournament with and expecting to win 1 or 2 games and maybe make it to the Sweet 16. Still coached by Buzz Williams, I believe. But Tech is such a hard place to play. It's a trap game, and again, Duke won such an emotional game against Clemson with game-winning free throws. You just don't expect them to come out 2 days later with all this fight and gusto, and that's exactly what they did. This was a game Duke ended up winning by 10. Virginia Tech did keep it relatively close in the second half, but they never tied or took a lead. I think at one point they got it down to a 3-point lead, but it wasn't for long. Duke was constantly Every time they would get it close, Duke was constantly going on runs to keep them out of it, which is an awesome sign for a team, by the way, to have the frame of mind that, hey, look, leads dwindled down a little bit. Let's get back to what we know, and then once we build the lead back up, then we can start taking chances again. Duke was able to have the wherewithal to do that at Castle, and this to me is, it sounds crazy, but this to me is one of our more impressive performances on the year. Because, again, Kyle Filipowski got into foul trouble early in the game. Now it wasn't actually early in the first half in this one, like sometimes it usually is. Flip didn't play as many minutes in the second half as anyone would have guessed, because he picked up, I think, 3 quick fouls in that second half. I think he had 1 in the first half, then picked up 3. It felt like back to back in the second half, and he wasn't able to play for a massive part of the second half. But it still didn't ever feel like it was in danger. I know the game got close. This is one of those games that sometimes there are games where it's closer than the numbers indicate. This is a game where it doesn't feel as close as the numbers indicated. I felt like I was never really worried Duke was going to lose this game. And part of that, again, was in part to, it was in part to a lot of guys. But, man, even though he didn't lead things on the box score, I still want to give Tyrese Proctor my player of the game for this, because if you watch the game, he's just an electric passer, finished with 5 assists on the day, only 2 turnovers, 12 points, 2 for 3 from his 3-point shots, and 5 for 8 from the field. With all that without getting to the line, by the way. But defensively as well, he was locked on to Couture in the first half, who I think had 4 points in the first half, and he finished with 15. They were moving him around to get defended, switching to get defended by some other guys other than Proctor. But Proctor, once again, as he's coming into his own offensively, the defense is remaining where we can throw him on the team's best guard and trust that they're probably not going to have a good night, which I'm really excited to see him matched up against R.J. Davis. I'd have to go back and watch the old Carolina games, but obviously last year Carolina had R.J. Davis and Caleb Love, and I think Tyrese was mainly D'ing up Caleb Love just because of the size. RJ is only about 5'11", Caleb Love is 6 foot and some change, and Proctor's 6'5", so he can typically guards the bigger of the 2 guards. But I think against Carolina, he's going to have RJ Davis all night, which is going to be a big size discrepancy. I mean, 5'11" to 6'5" is a big deal just in real life, and when you're talking about on the basketball court, and with a guy that has Proctor's speed. Gosh, I mean, we'll see how RJ does. I'm sure RJ's a great player. I'm sure he'll be up to the challenge, but that'll be interesting to watch because I love watching Tyrese defend guys. He so feeds off the energy of the other team's best players, and I'm excited to see that matchup. But this was a game where I thought Tyrese was the player of the game, even though he didn't win on the stat sheet. Some of the other guys who lit up the stat sheet, Flip, even with the foul trouble, finished with 14 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists, 1 steal, 3 turnovers, but again, a game where he's limited by foul trouble, but he still finishes with 14 and 8. Those are good numbers, but they're not Filipowski numbers. Filipowski should be a 20 and 10 guy every night, it feels like, and he is that guy when he's on the floor. Teams have just been able to take him off the floor too easy. Another guy who had an awesome game was Jeremy Roach. This was the healthiest we've seen Jeremy Roach since his injury against Georgia Tech. If you remember, he banged up his knee, I believe, against Georgia Tech late in the game. Actually came back and played in that game, but then subbed out and didn't play in the next game against Pitt, game we lost. Came back to play against Louisville, but was ruled out in the second half after he kind of re-aggravated it or wasn't quite fully healthy, and has played in every game since, but this was a kind of a useful. This is what we're used to seeing from Jeremy Roach. He finished 5 for 11, but actually 4 for 5 on his 3-point attempts. I think the injury at some point is still making him think about some of his driving shots too much. Because if you've watched Jeremy Roach for any period at Duke, you know how money his mid-range game is and his runner game is, running layups. And he missed several of those in this game that you're just not used to seeing him miss. But still, even with that, he finished with 16 points and 4 assists. Awesome stat line for him. Only 2 turnovers. But man, this was the healthiest we've seen Jeremy. This is the Jeremy of old, and I'm hoping that because we have so many days off before the Carolina game, he'll be able to get back to 100% or at least close to it for the Carolina game. Ryan Young also had some extremely important minutes. He needed to have a good game with Flip going out, and he had maybe what I saw was his best game of the year. Finished with 10 points only in 15 minutes, 5 for 6 on his shots. Finished with 3 offensive rebounds, 2 defensive for 5 total, 2 assists, 1 block, no turnovers. Did foul 4 times, but Duke foul trouble was a big deal in this game for not just Flip, but for several guys, including some of the guards. Jeremy Roach finished with 3. The other guards, almost all of them, finished with 2. Mitchell finished with 2 as well. But Ryan Young, his rebounding was huge in this one. This was a game where we actually crushed Virginia Tech on the boards. They had 20 rebounds to our 38, and he was a massive part of that. But also another big part of that was that Jared McCain was able to come away with 10 rebounds, so he almost finishes with a double-double in this game as he grabbed 9 defensive boards, which is just defensive boards, 1 offensive rebound, finishing for 10, which is just insane for a guy who's like 6'2", 6'3". I don't know how he is so good at rebounding for his size, but I don't know if it's positioning or he has good leaping ability, but he just in the right spots to catch some of these rebounds, and I love to see it. We needed a guy like that on this team where rebounding is not our physical strong suit whatsoever. And this, again, to just continue to harp on how good McCain is. This is a game he wouldn't even tell you he went 3 for 10 shooting, 1 for 6 from 3, which is abysmal from him. Was perfect at the line, 2 for 2, but it finished with 9 points, which that's like a Jared McCain stat line to start the year. But these past few games, he's played so much better than that. But even when he's not shooting his best, he just makes so many winning plays, man. And it's awesome to have a guy like this on your team that knows, he's confident. He shoots the ball with confidence no matter what his stat line is, which is exactly what you want from a 3-point guy. But he also knows how to do so many other things other than shoot threes. Duke has had a lot of these guys come in over the past few years that have been, quote unquote great 3-point shooters, but are just such a liability everywhere else. And I'm not even just talking defense. You can be a great 3-point shooter and still be a liability on offense if you're not moving off the ball, if you're not setting screens and passing well, being involved with the offense. It helps no one for you to just chill in the corner and not move. And Duke's had some guys that have done that recent years, but McCain is exactly the kind of guard and shooter you want in college, a guy who is a 3-point shooter, but that's not the only part of his game he's working on. You can tell he's doing so much other stuff. He's able to impact the game even without making a 3, which he only made 1 in this game, and it's a game Duke is able to win by 10 on the road in a really, really very hostile environment. So this was a big win for Duke. Just had trap game written all over this game, and Duke was still able to come out with it. I'd be happy. I tweeted this out after the game. I would have been happy with this game if this is the result at Cameron. Virginia Tech is 13-8 now. Decent little school, a team that is talking about making a run to the NCAA tournament. I think they're going to need a lot to get there, just with the way the ACC continues to be disrespected, I think, by the committee who decides the seeding. Hopefully that can change, but this is a team that, they go on a little bit of a run, win some games. You could see them being a 10 seed or something like that, and Duke was able to comfortably kind of just keep them at arm's reach and handle them throughout the duration of the game. That's one you're happy about at Cameron, but to have this game happen at Castle is just such a bigger deal considering the fans that they have at Virginia Tech. Some great, intense fans. So yeah, those are my thoughts on the last few Duke games. We all know who's next, the North Carolina Tar Heels. That's going to be a big one. I may or may not come with you with a preview episode for that one, but we'll certainly be chatting after the game. One of the most exciting games of the year. If Duke wins this game against Carolina, it will put them right back into the national spotlight where they belong. And Carolina will stay there too, of course. But this win would be just huge for Duke in more than one way. Obviously, a game against Carolina is always, to the two games against Carolina are always, two of your most important games in the year. Certainly the most important regular season games of the year. If you're talking to any Duke or Carolina fan, doesn't matter what the non-conference schedule is, or perhaps even how you play in the ACC tournament. I think most Duke or Carolina fans would take a sweep over the other team and they lose in the first round of the ACC tournament. I just feel like that. I feel like they would accept that. If you told me right now we could sweep North Carolina, but then get upset by Clemson in the first or second round of the ACC tournament, I would take it. Give me the wins against North Carolina, who's ranked higher, and then let us lose in the ACC tournament, because we all know losing in the ACC tournament means your chances of playing better in the NCAA tournament are better. The ACC tournament champion hasn't won the title in a long time, so you kind of want to lose there. Give me the sweep against the Tar Heels. But that is going to be it for me today. Thanks so much for listening. Again, apologies for the lesser audio quality. We'll be back with the regular mics here soon. But thank you guys so much for listening. As always, go Blue Devils.